Welcome to the Startups Without Borders podcast. I'm Valentina Primo, a journalist who fell in love with the Middle East, spent 6 years telling its startup stories, and now founded Startups Without Borders. Each week, we'll be sharing inspiring interviews with the most audacious startup founders while highlighting resources for anyone starting up. These are the tools to bring out the legend in you. You're listening to the Startups Without Borders podcast, episode 4. Today, we speak to Ana Alvarez Monge. Ana is the founder of Migration Hub, a collaborative network for social entrepreneurs and a platform for migrant entrepreneurs, which was recognized as one of the 100 landmarks in Germany. A coach, university lecturer, a consultant, and a mentor for migrant entrepreneurs, Ana is an unstoppable force. Hailing from Costa Rica, she's not only changing the future prospects of migrants across Germany, but also advocating for a change in perceptions. In this episode, we'll dive into the nits and grits of how to access finance and fund your startup idea, especially when you're a newcomer in a new land. Migration Hub is an organization today known across all of Europe. I was wondering, behind it all, there's this woman from Costa Rica. I want to know all about the story. How did you get there? How did you arrive? And how the idea came to your mind to start Migration Hub?
Right. Yes. Well, actually, I will have to go back to exactly 3 years ago when I moved to Berlin. I have to say that I did have no idea where I could start. I just had this background in human rights, and I knew that I was working already for a while back home, and I knew that I could contribute to the current issues going on in Germany, because 3 years ago exactly was when Germany was welcoming all these asylum seekers, the majority coming from Syria. And you saw all the civil society, the companies and private individuals gathering, welcoming all these asylum seekers from the main train stations into allocating them and hosting them in their houses. So I even was inspired as an individual and someone coming from Latin America who has never seen anything like that. And I joined a group of volunteers who were as well trying to ideate and trying to find ways how to support. And this is where I joined a volunteer group called 180 Degrees, which is consulting pro bono for social entrepreneurs that exists almost in 100 countries, but they're really well established in Germany and in Berlin as well. So I joined them. And one of the first projects that I was assigned to was in a project that was aiming to build kind of like this co-working space for volunteers working to welcome asylum seekers and all these new so-called innovators. And then I think it was a natural act that I just joined this team. And I was supposed to be consulting them, but at the end, I ended up turning the concept and building what it is today, Migration Hub Network. And that happened within months, Valentina. This is something that I was not expecting in the first place, to become an entrepreneur. I was not expecting that it was going to have so much acceptance. And now that you mentioned that it's well known in all Europe, and yes, we've received so much support and organizations from all over Europe, and sometimes even away from Europe, it's because there's a lot of work involved with that. But I want to emphasize that the idea of building this network of support and working as well with migrant entrepreneurs, like I am as well, it's resonating with a lot of people. So that's how it all started. And it seems like it was 10 years ago, but it was just 3 years ago exactly.
Right. So what is Migration Hub? I know it's a hub. I've been to the hub in Berlin, which is beautiful. I know it's a network. So how do you define it, and what do you offer refugees and migrants?
Exactly. Well, Migration Hub is first and foremost was created as a network of social entrepreneurs working in the field of migration, and refugees and asylum seekers support. And through that, we basically, number one, we offer a space for these people to gather. So that's why when we explain what Migration Hub is first and foremost, it's a network. Yeah. Secondly, and very importantly, is a community. It's a community because we bring all these sectors together in order to build a network. You need the private sector, you need the public sector, and you need all these civil society entrepreneurs as well who are impacting. So we together can form a community. So that's why we, in a constantly basis, we do have a lot of events in different topics, as well, because we understand a network as a network that connects different topics around the big topic, which is migration. So, for example, we can tap one day into financial inclusion, into resettlement, into education, and so on and so forth. So we understand a network that connects all these different dots and people, and a platform, because we also provide this mentoring process, not only to our network members, but also now to the migrant entrepreneurs. And this actually started, this idea in the migrant entrepreneurship was started in the beginning of 2016. I have to say that it was one of the first events that I organized for Migration Hub in Berlin in January 2016, which was basically to talk about entrepreneurship, but to refugees, not to locals. And I have to say that many of the people who joined the first event was locals trying to build themselves social entrepreneurship for refugees. And we wanted actually to explore the possibilities and the opportunities that migrants and refugees had to become entrepreneurs. And we did it together with an organization that now it's what is called Think a Lab, as you also know them very well.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
So I'm super happy that somehow this event attracted so much attention, and this was the first time that we kind of worked together. So ever since, we've been already exploring and researching and investing time on that, because becoming an entrepreneur myself, it's been an entire lesson and a journey. And bringing this mentoring not only to social entrepreneurs, because somehow this is my expertise, also because of my human rights side and the knowledge in the field of migration. But on the other side, it started to attract a lot of migrants and refugees who were becoming entrepreneurs. And that's also when we decided to shape this program and launch it as well. So besides being a platform, we are definitely a mentor.
Right. So was it hard to start a social startup for yourself in terms of accessing funding as a migrant yourself? I mean, we're here to talk about the number one question on every entrepreneur's mind, right? Which is, how do I fund my startup? How hard was it for you?
Well, very, very, and still it is. And that's also why I'm so passionate about this topic, because on the way I have learned what to do and what not to do, basically, in order to get funding. Because as you know, anyways, for entrepreneurs, it is already difficult to get funded. It's double difficult if you are a woman. In fact, it is already proven that investors would give money to male entrepreneurs most likely and more funding than women themselves, and triple the factor if you are a migrant. Because there is still this perception that the trust, right? Where do you put the trust? So it's been really hard, Valentina. I cannot hide it, and I can see that it is the most asked question in our programs for the migrant entrepreneurs. Where do I get access to funding? How can I get funding? And the desperation behind this is the same one that leads to frustration. And sometimes I have to witness many entrepreneurs deciding to not continue in their journey because they really feel that the journey on getting funds is really it's really hard, and it's a non-end road. So it is still hard, but I can tell you that learning through this process, it takes time, and developing patience is a muscle that we must learn how to work it out. particularly because we learn. I mean, the migration hub that was 3 years ago is not the same as what it is 3 years later.
Right.
And this is completely normal because we're pivoting all the time. And investors and people who are giving you funding, they know this very well.
Yeah.
And they know this very well because they want you to know exactly who you are, most importantly. And you're going to learn it in the first years. And also, very important, it is the fact that you need to take time to learn your own expenses. You might know all the trick sites. For example, one of the first things we started to do back then with a mentor was a customer journey, to basically start already thinking in what kind of type of expenses and where I do get incomes and so on. But those that I drove back then are not the same ones because the reality on daily basis expenses are different. So getting to know your expenses first before applying to funding and before getting funding, it's crucial. And you unfortunately learn it with time.
Yeah, right. What we also learned on the way is that many of the things you think you need funding for can be achieved through partnerships, can be achieved in many different ways, right? Sometimes it's just about joining forces.
Absolutely. And that's also why I built initially, first and foremost, a network of support, right, of collaboration, which I still think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have nowadays among social entrepreneurs, that instead of being competing, and I don't blame anybody because the funds are kind of the same, so we're all competing to the same funds somehow. But the tricky part is how you collaborate between each other. And this is where companies and people who can give you like small amounts of money but are unrestricted, which are the ones that you need the most at the beginning, those comes from these partnerships. But you should definitely add value with people around you. And if you are a full profit company, the same. Getting to know your partners, and something that I always tell, because I love to give this input session to the migrant entrepreneurs about how to build partnerships. I always tell them that it's like a marriage. When you are married, it's not at the beginning. Everyone celebrates the beginning of the partnership and with a big party and so on.
Yeah.
But the truth is that you build it, and it's with time, because you're also getting to know each other, and you have expectations at the beginning that might not be the ones in 5 years later. But if you keep that partnership and nurturing that partnership is when it actually adds a real value to your company.
Right, exactly. Now, in terms of challenges to access those partnerships, to access the network and the funding itself, what is the difference in the experience that refugees and migrants face? Because we tend to speak of them as if they were one thing. But their circumstances vary, right? Because refugees have other kinds of legal protections. Is that the case?
It is the case, but I guess something in terms of building a network, let's say migrants are always, in general, that includes also asylum seekers and refugees, in general are very disconnected to the reality, which means you arrive to a country, you don't know anybody. I mean, you don't know where to go, which company, which bank. You don't know anybody.
Yeah.
So you need a network of people and a place where you can meet people like-minded. And with those are the ones that you're going to learn basically to grow your business. So in terms of support and in terms of contacts, that actually makes a huge difference. Refugees, for instance, they can have access to more support in theory, because in theory, refugees are the ones who have legal protection, and immediately, whenever they receive the refugee status, they receive access to have a working permit. And with working permit, most of them and most of the countries, you also receive the possibility to be self-employed. And by being a self-employed, it's most likely for you and it's easier for you to become an entrepreneur. When Migrants, on the other hand, or the ones who are called aspiring migrants, who are the ones who just arrived to country, but because the reason why of their arrival is not related to war or danger, perhaps is an economical reason, it's most likely harder for them because they're not protected and they have to go a long journey until they get access to working permits or to the access to be self-employed. It depends on the legislation and depends on the country. But this is where the Migration Hub, we want to definitely work with overall migrants, not only with refugees, because we can also learn from each other and we also can learn from the tricks sides from others. And with refugees, at least in Germany, it's easier because those with refugee status and under protection, they both receive working permit residencies and also the way of them to become self-employers, which is, let's say, one first step in becoming an entrepreneur.
Right. Now, for them, are banks an option?
It is definitely an option. The problem with banks, and we have to come here back to the same, unfortunately, situation of being a migrant, is that many of the banks, it's not only the idea behind it, that you come with like the $1 million idea and then the bank is going to give you money. Actually, let's even talk about it. Steve Jobs, how many banks he had to knock the door until he basically took a very small loan, and their partners were super afraid of getting bankrupt because no banks were believing in them. So imagine for migrants. I mean, migrants, we don't have a credit history in the banks. So for banks these days, they have to actually learn a lot. The financial system has to definitely change and see the economical opportunity that migrants have in different in the country itself, because banks are definitely an option. I mean, most of the entrepreneurs, they start by getting a loan in the bank, so it is definitely an option. The problem is that we need to soft some financial regulations for migrants to have access to this funding.
Right. And when they go to startup founding, for example, institutions, accelerators, incubators, are they open to migrants? What has been your experience in terms of them including and accepting people from other countries and people from conflict affected countries?
The good thing of the work that we are doing right now, Valentina, and with you, with your work, with my work, and all the amazing people who are around us, is that we're convincing the ecosystem, the immediate ecosystem, and the ecosystem is conformed by investors, by accelerators, and all these people who are giving the opportunity to people to build their companies. Is that right now they're changing their minds and they're super interested and eager to help in migrant entrepreneurship. In the United States, they've seen it already for a while, and you can see Silicon Valley is being built by migrants themselves. So you can see and study the ecosystem that they have around. They have a lot of investors, they have a lot of co-working spaces, incubators, accelerators, and all these things that is not easy, because it's never easy, but it's a little bit, let's say, accessible for people to learn how to become an entrepreneur, to get access to partners and get access to funding, or at least know how investors work. And what we are doing right now in Europe and in other places where they're not that familiar with that ecosystem, is basically to build it. And you can see how in the last 3 years, people are changing their mindsets. And now they're basically being open more and more to migrants and to refugees, because somehow we need to make integration happen. That's what they have in their heads. And they see the opportunity of people to be refugees and migrants to become entrepreneurs. So absolutely, accelerators and investors are definitely a way. In fact, how do I start if banks are not even an option necessarily, or getting into an accelerator? It's definitely depending on your idea. It's being surround yourself by ecosystems. This is how I started. I remember that in my first year, when I started, the first thing that I did was to join a volunteer group of like-minded people, because I was just coming from abroad, and I needed to have some sort of some sort of expertise, some sort of knowledge on who's doing what in Berlin, in the city that I just arrived, and I didn't know anybody. So the first thing is that you have to go and move yourself. You have to go out and move yourself around the ecosystem that might helps your idea. So going to events, being always taking courses. Sometimes you can even go to courses of things that you already know, but it's about meeting people. It's about trying to know was the trend. What are investors investing at the moment? Where is funding going at the moment? And being yourself out there will make you be more accessible and knowledgeable in where to get funding.
Yeah. And I think what you said is key as well, right? All the advocacy that we willingly or even, implicitly do in terms of letting people know, letting investors and incubators know that migrants and refugees are innovators, and they're bringing this whole pool of talent, which is very diverse and very different from local talent, which, is a source of opportunities, endless opportunities.
Totally. And I can see that, Valentina, when I did this first event together with these two organizations, it was we didn't even have a budget to do this event in the first place. And I remember that we only had Facebook to announce this event. And we used to be in a place in the 5th floor of a building, so the space was not even big enough. And somehow not everyone understood what the event was for. And as I told you, many people arrived thinking that they could become locals, especially Germans or Europeans, came to the event thinking that it was an opportunity for them to know how they can become entrepreneurs to help refugees. Yeah. And we wanted basically to gauge the opposite, how we can have more migrants becoming entrepreneurs. And ever since that, until last year, for example, that I had a big event where we welcomed, more than 200 people and migrants or refugees who had already some sort of entrepreneurship success venture, it has changed a lot. Mm-hmm. And the interest on people right now and organizations also changing their concepts. I mean, I have seen how many organizations in the last 2 years have changed their initial concepts into migrant entrepreneurship or refugee entrepreneurship. And that tells you already how much of interest exists out there, and investors as well. I mean, I can tell you on people these days, actually, basically in early December, I received a new person coming from another part of Germany saying, hey, I know investors, I'm a social entrepreneur myself, and I'm super interested in that thing that you're doing in migrant entrepreneurship, and I want to see how this can be expanded all over Germany. So then you're starting to see that whatever we're doing is kind of like a movement, and it's necessary. Yeah. The more we are helping refugees and migrants to become entrepreneurs, the better for the economy.
Yeah, definitely. Totally. I mean, I think I'm remembering a comment that a Syrian entrepreneur did to me when we were running one of the latest programs. And he said, I was not going to sign up at the beginning. I was not going to register. I didn't feel brave enough. But then I kept seeing the ads and the posts on social media, and I just decided to take that risk. I think a big part of getting that funding, as you said, right, is being a go-getter, is just going for it and working on your confidence to approach, whether it is a bank or an investor or an accelerator.
Totally. And being the first ones is always the hard part. I mean, we're not going to say that we're the first migrants in becoming entrepreneurs. There's many people out there. But what I'm trying to do actually these days is to go and get them, the ones who went already through the journey, because we need them to share their stories. And what do I mean by that? It's because it takes time. I mean, not even the biggest companies that we know these days, those build their ventures from one day to another, and they just got funding. It took them years as well. Yeah. So this is something that we, as the ones who are providing platforms for migrants to become entrepreneurs, we need to be super realistic and open with them and tell them our stories, that it's not easy, that sometimes getting paid it's too long, that payments can get late, the system works in a different way, that as much as you want, you cannot change the local system. So it's about also developing this muscle that I told you on patience, because it's you can go as fast as possible, but the system doesn't go as fast as possible and the other way around. So it's a matter of knowing that if you don't get funding, there is a reason for that, and there is something that you have to change and rethink, and perhaps sometimes it's time to iterate. Maybe sometimes it's time to change or to get a team, or in my case, for instance, 3 years later, I am actually adding a new late co-founder coming next year. And someone said, like, why are you doing it? Well, because you learn the lesson. You learn that you need support. You learn that perhaps the team is not enough, or you kind of start already finding within your team who's also gonna carry this burden with you. Yeah. So it's a lesson, and it's completely normal. So that's why I am always so fascinated about the financial access, because even myself, I've been desperate many times as an entrepreneur that I need to do this, that if I would have money, I could do these amazing things. And maybe yes, but now I look in retrospective. If someone would have gave me the amount of funding I needed 2 years ago, I perhaps wouldn't have even gotten where I am here, or building new partners, of being creative on where I get money from. Yeah. So it takes time. It definitely takes time. And the time also teaches you so many things that will lead you to success.
Definitely. Now, in this process of building and strengthening that patience muscle, what do you advise entrepreneurs who need to have, to need the means to sustain themselves while working on their startup? When they're migrants or refugees, oftentimes they don't have support, so they need to find, an immediate source of income. Do you advise them? Yeah. Do you advise them to get a part-time job in the meantime, or what is your strategy for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many of the people that we're working with, they already have some sort of like mini jobs or some sort of side income based. Many of them, for example, they have to evaluate if they have in-house perhaps the support, whether they are married or they're studying still, and their scholarship somehow covers partially the basics, at least that you have a roof, so to say. Yeah. We still have to do a lot on that, because if we can see that the people who are starting a new business while working, it actually takes a while, because until you are not fully focused on this, then it's very complicated, and you can get super exhausted and get sometimes into burnouts. But the truth is that having, for example, something that I would recommend is try to scan online what kind of fellowships exist out there. Build a little bit more on your idea, join an incubator, so later you can join an accelerator, and then the accelerator can give you a little bit of money so you can survive from. Right. And most importantly which is I have learned from my mentors later on, is think on yourself as an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. If you're starting to make money and you are not covering yourself, it's a problem. And I know, because I've been there as well. Actually, I am there many of the times, that every single coin that comes to your pocket, it goes back to the company that you're building, right? That you want to spend in other people. You want to say thank you to many other people out there. But in the last person that you think is in yourself. Yeah. So this is a problem, because the most important investment that you could do is to yourself. Because without you, your idea is not going to happen.
Right.
And that is something that I have learned in a hard way, that it's on you. Because you can hire employees, they will come, they will leave, they will stick around, they will help you a lot. But they will leave because it's not their thing. Yeah. And you are the one who's going to stay. And if you are underfunded, this is when it becomes a problem, because then it's your personal liability and it's your personal security as well that you're putting in danger. And at the end, the biggest danger is the disappearance of your own company. So so finding first and foremost a way how you can sustain yourself or how you can receive some sort of help outside, it would be needed. For instance, another thing that I've been advising and learning, and of course we still need to do a lot of work on that regard, is building a network where we can attract more angel investors. Angel investors normally are all those who can inject this capital to your company in two ways, whether they also join in equity or they also, it's kind of like a payback or is a loan, basically, as I did started as well. So it gives you a little bit of fuel, so to say, to start making more money. And this is where you can start at least financing very important and very key things like your health system. In Germany, actually, it's a little bit tricky because ever since you become an entrepreneur as self-employed, you have to, is a must, you need to have your own social security, which costs a lot of money. Yeah. So you are obliged, yes, to pay yourself. In my case, as I said, I learned in the hard way, and I love to tell these stories because I know that many people out there are thinking that, oh my God, no, I mean, all the money that you have is for your company. What are you talking about? You're just making your own money. No. I mean, in Germany, there is a reason why they have such a secured system. I remember that I didn't pay myself for almost 2 years because I first hired employees than I paid myself. Yeah. Which I thought, well, but I mean, I'm a social entrepreneur. I am afraid that people will think I'm putting the money on my pockets. Yeah. And until a mentor told me once, no, Ana, this is completely wrong. You should be doing the opposite. Yeah. Right. And then I said, no, never. I will never do that. Until one day I received an invoice that I didn't, first of all, you didn't know that existed. That's also why I was saying that you have to learn, and it takes time until you learn your expenses. Yeah. Because that day I was shocked. I received an invoice that apparently, since the day one that I registered my company, so to say, I had to pay an insurance that I didn't know that existed about my own liability as an entrepreneur. Wow. So it was a year later and I had to pay this bill for an entire year. Yeah. So those things shocks you. And that day I remembered my mentor clearly when he said, "You're doing it wrong." Perhaps he didn't tell me why. Yeah. But then I learned that you, the entrepreneur, has to be priority. Yeah. And at the end, you're not going to take any business until you really kind of focus yourself in covering your basic incomes. And if that also means a mini job outside or a part-time job, so be it. But the most important thing is take care of yourself. Right.
And you mentioned something crucial, right? Which is knowing your finances. Do financial planning. So how do you learn that? Because, I mean, most of us, if we didn't study businesses, probably will not know how to do financial planning. How was your process of learning that?
Well, in my case, I have to say, I worked for many years in the Ministry of Finance in my country, so I kind of knew a little bit of the composition of the country budget from Costa Rica. No, I'm kidding. But no, it's too way different. So that's why I was saying that it takes time to learn your expenses because, first I remember, I'm always trying to imagine everything, right? To visualize everything that I need to have. So I kind of put a number into that. And I remember that the first thing I did was to build a budget. Right. But the budget differs completely to what it was built at the beginning because of all these expenses that no one tells you that you have to have. Yeah. So, I'm based in Germany. My company is based in Germany, so I cannot even start by explaining all these insurances and expenses that you have to cover. It's a nightmare. Actually, sometimes I even scream out saying that Germany has to soft many legislations for entrepreneurs to actually make it because it's too expensive. But either way, these are things that you learn in time. Yeah. Now I can tell people, for example, in how to build their budget and what are the first things that they should take into consideration. Because also, as we have these hubs. We actually have 2 hubs, one in Heidelberg and another one in Berlin, both independently from each other. But the truth is that it allows us to see a lot of examples. So in Berlin, for instance, we offer this as an address for the entrepreneurs. And why an address? Well, because in Germany, everything is still with letters. So if you miss one letter and you don't pay that letter, well, you're almost over. And I can tell you this, we have had lots of experiences. So I remember always receiving letters from all the entrepreneurs who signed Migration Hub as an address. And I always used to receive like last notifications. And I remember giving it to the entrepreneur and said, hey, this looks super important. You should pay that now. And then trying to explain them how and why it is important, why they have to do it, and being seated in front of them. And I tell them, like, what is this? I didn't know that I had to pay this. I mean, they never tell you when you register your company, blah, blah, blah. And so, well, yeah, I know. Nobody tells you. It's not written anywhere that you have to pay these things. Yeah. So the most important thing is of the work that we're doing in providing these platforms for entrepreneurs is telling this information. And this is where I always find super, super useful from the entrepreneurs, migrants, refugees who are taking part of our programs, is that we always take the opportunity to bring this very daily basis examples. Because then they start thinking, oh, well, then I have to save money for this and for that. Because normally, when you go to a business class or something, they don't tell you these things. They don't tell you save money for the insurance that you have to pay against accidents, and that is outside of the insurances that you already pay. You have to pay also a tax for television and radio in Germany, and you didn't know. So those are things that locals might know, and I also know from locals that sometimes they didn't even know. So it's about us. It's about bringing us in these platforms, in kind of bringing these entrepreneurs together and sharing these experiences, because then you learn your expenses. So most importantly is when it comes to build your finances is kind of write down all your expenses. And try to allocate them in different groups. So if you see that, for example, you are starting to pay a lot in rent because you needed to have an office, because in Germany you are obliged to have an office, well, join then a co-working space, or trying to find ways how you kind of level down these things. But that's what I keep saying. It really takes time. But take it down. Trying to note down every single expense that you have and put them in groups. So then finally, in 3-4 years, actually most people say that 5 years is what it takes in a startup to be consolidated, is then by then you will have actually the real budget you need. Right? Because at the beginning you're just basically covering some expenses, and it's gonna change. Needs changes, the company changes, and the more money you get, then you have to pay different taxes and so on. So it's very difficult since the beginning to start already making a kind of financial planning. But start slow, right? Try to start slow with yourself, and don't punish yourself if you start committing mistakes. That is completely normal. The most important thing is pay attention to these expenses that you're doing. Try to save as much as possible, and at the beginning, of course, and invest in yourself, and try to scan in your current country legislation what kind of taxes exist outside, what kind of institutions you have to start paying, and what are the steps that you have to do in order to even employ people, for example, because once you employ people, then you have to also pay many other things. Or if you don't employ people, how you can get this support. But try to narrow it down. And these days in the internet, there's a lot of templates on financial planning. But those things are most likely built by and for big companies, although you can also find templates for startups. But might not be the same. Might not be the same because your expenses depends on what your business core is about, and it depends a lot on exactly what you need to do at the beginning, right?
Right. Well, this is very, very valuable advice. I was wondering, Ana, where can refugee or migrant entrepreneurs find Migration Hub? How can they contact you? How can they get more information?
Well, anybody from any part of the world can definitely join the network, first and foremost, because these are the kind of experiences that we aim to exchange from time to time. If it's not in person, at least online, where we can exchange these knowledges. So please go to migrationhub.network. There you can join the network, whether as a migrant entrepreneur or as a social project working with migrants. You can also find us on Facebook as a Migration Hub network. We have 2 groups, one for the local communities that we have in Berlin and in Heidelberg, where we have hubs, but we also have a global one, which I really encourage everyone to share these things in a regular basis, because this is how we learn from each other. And so you can find us online as well. And if you are in Berlin, we have a physical hub. Please come and just Google us and join us. We have always lots of events going on, same in Heidelberg as well. We're aiming to build more hubs or partnered up, and we are as well partnering up with other physical spaces in different cities, so we can bring this knowledge as well to different cities around the world. And I'm super grateful as well to partner up with you with Startup Without Borders, because if in any case we can also bring this knowledge, even if it's online, let's do so. I mean, for us migrant entrepreneurs, we only have each other, and learning from each other, failures or successes, is the only way how we can make it.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Ana. This has been really, really great. Very inspirational, very informative as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in Migration Hub. I'm looking forward to working together.
Absolutely, Valentina, and keep doing this. You don't know how many lives and entrepreneurs you can be helping right now.
Thank you so much. You like what you hear? You should definitely follow us on your favorite platform. So next time you're on Instagram or Facebook, type Startups Without Borders and check out all the videos, the stories, and the resources for you to become a legend.